Welcome back to John Dawson Disc Golf. Today I want to talk about something that every disc golfer eventually experiences. And if you've been playing for any length of time, you know exactly what I mean. It's that moment when disc golf finally starts to click. By the way, if you're new here, I'm John Dawson. I'm 54, I play almost every day, and I'm just still trying to figure out why this game has become such a big part of my life. What's funny is that when people first see disc golf, it looks incredibly simple. Like, from the outside, it looks like throwing a frisbee. What's so hard about that? And, the courses are in public parks. The discs look familiar. And so you assume it should be fairly easy to pick up until you try it. And then, suddenly, you realize that nothing flies the way you expected it to. Discs, they fade early, or they turn over too much. Sometimes they dive straight into the ground. Sometimes they launch into the woods like they're trying to escape the planet. You start to realize very quickly that disc golf is far more technical than it appears. In my case, throwing discs wasn't new to me. I had been throwing frisbees for most of my life. And some of my earliest memories are standing in the front yard with my dad throwing those cheap, flippy frisbees you could buy at Kmart. And the dad would throw what the dad throw, Well, eventually, I discovered Ultimate Frisbee. And that's really when I fell in love with the feel of a flying disc. The Discraft Ultrastar 175 gram, that was the disc we all used. And if you played Ultimate, you know that disc well. It's a beautiful thing. In high school, my friends and I would head out to the park almost every afternoon and just throw for hours, usually with Grateful Dead, bootleg, playing, somewhere in the background. And later, I played on my college club team, and by that point, I felt completely comfortable with the disc. I could throw forehand, backhand, hammer throws, all of it felt natural. So when I discovered disc golf, around the time I turned 50, I assumed the transition would be easy. It wasn't. Disc golf discs are completely different animals. They're smaller, they're faster, and far more sensitive to angle and speed. Suddenly, I was dealing with things like speed ratings, glide, turn, fade, and plastic types. Even the weight mattered. The muscle memory that I had built from Ultimate didn't translate immediately. And for a while, I couldn't get the discs to fly the way they were designed to fly. And that was incredibly frustrating. So like most beginners, I went down this rabbit hole. I watched hundreds of hours of form videos. I started filming my own throws and analyzing them like an engineer debugging code. That part actually came naturally to me because I've spent most of my career solving technical problems, and disc golf quickly started to feel like a technical puzzle. But even with all of that effort, there was a stretch where the game just felt hard. Fellow players warned me about this phase. They told me that the first few months could be frustrating and that eventually things would start to line up. They were right. The real breakthrough for me came when I started doing field work. I would take a bag full of discs out to an open field and just throw until my arms felt like it might fall off. Because of my Ultimate background, I naturally gravitated towards understable discs like the end of a Sidewinder or the Axiom Insanity, one of my favorites. I love throwing hyzer flips, but probably because I was used to releasing discs, on exaggerated angles, from my Ultimate days. And over time, I started trusting more stable discs as well, things like the Destroyer or the Streamlined Trace. Slowly, I began to understand how stability actually worked and how predictable those flights could become. The first part of my game that really clicked was distance. Once I figured out the combination of grip and nose angle, run up, timing, and release, something interesting happened. I realized that I could consistently hit 300 feet without forcing it. I remember standing at one end of the soccer field and aiming for the goal on the other side. Once that distance started feeling routine, the entire course started looking different to me. Suddenly, most holes felt attackable, and that was a huge mental shift. At the time, my forehand wasn't nearly as reliable as it is now. In tournaments, I mostly used it as, a utility shot rather than something I trusted off the tee. And putting, well, it was its own adventure entirely. My putting form went through a lot of different shapes in the early years, and there were rounds where I genuinely felt like the only way I could make a putt was if I parked the disc right under the basket. But over time, that improved too, although my approach to practice has always been a little unconventional. I've never loved traditional putting practices. I'd usually rather play around rather than stand in one place throwing hundreds of putts. Eventually, I made a simple adjustment during solo rounds. Whenever I'd finish a hole, I'd putt twice instead of once, and that small change added a lot more repetitions without making practice feel like a chore. The other big frustration early on was understanding how to get discs to turn over. I made the mistake that many ultimate players make. I assumed that heavier discs were better because I was just used to throwing the 175 gram Ultra Star. What I didn't understand at the time was how stability interacts with arm speed and weight. Eventually, I discovered that slightly lighter discs could unlock entirely different flights. So now I've discovered this 160 gram insanity. I have it now that, if I throw a hyzer flip flat, I can watch this thing drift into just a perfect turning arc. It's one of those discs I would hate to lose. Here's the interesting thing about improvement in disc golf. There usually isn't a single moment where everything suddenly works. For me, it happened gradually. I kept watching tournaments on the Disc Golf Network and Jomez. I kept doing field work. I kept filming my form and asking better players for advice. And slowly, the pieces started falling into place. And then one day, I would revisit a course I had played a few months earlier, and something strange would happen. The course felt smaller. Fairways looked wider. Lines looked cleaner. Holes that used to feel intimidating suddenly felt approachable. And sometimes, when I released the disc, it would just fly exactly the way I pictured it in my mind. And that's when you realize something important. All that practice was working. The first time I broke the 450-foot mark was another one of those moments. I threw a 169 gram champion wraith in an open field, and it carried to about 475 feet. I even posted it on my channel because I almost couldn't believe it myself. I caught a little bit of tailwind at just the right moment, and that disc just kept flying. Watching a disc do that, it's magical. And maybe that's the reason people just push through the frustration of learning the sport. Every once in a while, you throw a shot that feels perfect. The release is clean, the disc flips exactly when it should, and it glides towards the target in this graceful arc. In that moment, you realize something. This is possible. Disc golf is addictive because improvement is real. You climb one hill and suddenly see another behind it. There is always another level of skill to unlock. But more than anything, it's the beauty of flight that keeps people coming back. A ball golf drops. A disc, it flies. It stays in the air. It glides. It turns and fades and cars through the space exactly the way you might imagine. And when that happens, even for a moment, the entire game starts to make sense. If you're in that frustrating phase right now, my advice is just keep going. Everyone goes through it. Eventually, the pieces start lining up. And when they do, the game becomes something completely different. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear about the moment when disc golf first clicked for you. And if these conversations are meaningful to you, consider subscribing. I'm exploring these questions in real time, and I'd be glad to have you along for the journey. Because somewhere in your future, there's a throw that's gonna feel exactly right. And when that happens, you'll understand why people never stop chasing it. As always, thank you for being here on John Dawson Disc Golf.